The set for Jimmy Kimmel Live looked like any other Tuesday night taping. The audience was lively, cameras rolled into action, and Jennifer Lopez entered to a wave of enthusiastic applause. Dressed in an elegant emerald green gown, she beamed her iconic smile, waving confidently to the crowd. As she took her seat gracefully, crossing her legs and brushing back her hair, everything appeared routine. Jimmy Kimmel, smiling broadly, waited for the applause to fade before leaning forward with apparent sincerity. "Jennifer Lopez, everyone," he said, gesturing warmly toward her as the applause continued. "Thanks so much for joining us tonight, J-Lo. You look absolutely amazing as always." Jennifer returned the compliment with an easy smile. "Thank you, Jimmy. I'm happy to be here. I've been looking forward to it." "We've been excited to have you," Kimmel replied, flipping through his cue cards with ease. "There's so much to dive into: your new projects, music, and business ventures. But first, I have to ask about something that's been making the rounds in the tabloids lately." Jennifer's demeanor shifted slightly, barely noticeable, but there for those paying attention. Her smile remained, though a flicker of tension appeared in her eyes and posture. "Oh boy," she said with a soft laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "What are they talking about now?" Kimmel chuckled in return, though his tone had taken on a sharper edge. "You know how it goes. People love to speculate. I'm just wondering how you feel about some of the recent criticism regarding your performances. There are claims that you're not delivering the same energy you once did." The question lingered, carrying a subtle challenge. Jennifer's poised expression slipped for just a moment before she regained her composure. But the moment had shifted. The light-hearted tone promised during pre-show planning had taken a turn. "I'm sorry, could you clarify what you're referring to?" she asked, her voice still polite, though now edged with firmness. "Because from what I've heard, both my audiences and collaborators have been very positive." Kimmel's smile widened, but there was a sharpness to it now. "Well, let's be honest. You're not 25 anymore. Some people are starting to wonder if maybe it's time to recalibrate, perhaps put more focus on the business side of things, instead of trying to compete with performers who are half your age." A hush fell across the studio. The audience, once animated, grew silent as the tension thickened. Jennifer's hands, once resting easily on the armrest, tightened ever so slightly. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her tone now steely. "Are you seriously questioning my ability to perform just because of my age?" "I'm just asking the questions people are already thinking about," Kimmel said, raising his hands in mock defense, still wearing a smile that suggested he was enjoying the exchange. "We've all seen the videos online. Some of the choreography doesn't seem as sharp as before. The vocals, at times, sound a bit strained. I'm just curious, have you noticed it too?" Jennifer's expression tightened subtly, and she paused, clearly measuring her response. The seasoned performer in her clashed with the individual who had just been publicly challenged. When she finally spoke, her tone was calm but firm. "Jimmy, I've been doing this for over 30 years. I've sold millions of records, led major films, and built several successful businesses. If you think I'm going to sit here and let you speak to me like that, you're mistaken." Kimmel, however, didn't step back. If anything, her reaction seemed to push him further. "Look, I truly respect everything you've achieved. I really do. But can't we be honest about how aging works in the entertainment industry? It happens to everyone." "Aging?" Jennifer replied, her voice rising slightly as she leaned in. "The reality is that I'm performing at the highest level, working harder than people half my age. What's really happening here is you trying to diminish that for what? A few laughs? More clicks?" The room was completely still now. What had started as a light celebrity chat had clearly shifted into something far more serious and personal. Then came the remark that would mark the turning point of the conversation. Instead of easing the tension, redirecting, or acknowledging her concerns, Kimmel chose to continue. "I'm just saying, maybe it's time to accept where things are in your career," he said, his tone now notably condescending. "How long can you keep pretending to be Jenny from the block? Doesn't it start to feel a little desperate?" The word landed with force. Jennifer's eyes narrowed, her frustration now fully visible. In that moment, the atmosphere in the studio changed completely. The usual celebrity interview dynamic had vanished, replaced by a far more charged interaction. A heavy silence followed. Jennifer sat still, eyes locked on Kimmel, her expression unwavering. When she finally responded, her voice was quiet but clear, picked up only faintly by the microphones. Every word was deliberate, anchored by decades of experience with skepticism and doubt. "Did you just call me desperate?" she asked slowly. "Did you really say that to me, here on national television?" For the first time in the interview, Kimmel's smile began to fade. Still, his tone remained dismissive. "Well, if the label fits," he said with a shrug that was meant to look casual, though it came off as indifferent. "I'm not trying to be rude, just being real. Isn't that what makes for good TV?" Candid discussions? Jennifer let out a short, dry laugh. Candid? You call this candid? You ambush me with dismissive questions, bring up my age as if it defines my worth, and then label me desperate for responding? That's your idea of a real conversation? Hey, I'm not writing the headlines, Kimmel replied, gesturing loosely toward the cue cards on his desk. I'm just bringing up what people are already discussing. Isn't it better to talk about these things directly instead of pretending they don't exist? His patronizing tone was unmistakable now. Jennifer's posture shifted as she leaned forward, no longer the relaxed guest but someone clearly prepared to stand her ground. Jennifer repeated, her voice rising slightly with each word. You mean the narratives tabloids invent to sell magazines and boost clicks? You mean the noise spread online by people who can't stand to see a woman remain successful for 3 decades? That's what you want to have an honest conversation about? Kimmel raised his hands again, but this time the gesture lacked the confidence it had earlier. It looked more like an attempt to diffuse tension. All right, let's just take a breath here. I didn't realize this was such a touchy subject for you. Touchy. Jennifer shot back, her voice sharp and direct. This isn't about being touchy. It's about respect. It's about common decency. Something you clearly don't seem to grasp. In the audience, the mood had shifted. What began as a light entertainment segment was now clearly uncomfortable. Some attendees looked uneasy, while others had started recording, realizing this moment would likely become headline material. Still, Kimmel pressed on, either unaware of the impact or unwilling to back down. I get that this isn't easy to hear, but sometimes the truth stings. You're Jennifer Lopez. You've earned legendary status. But even legends face reality. Madonna dealt with this, so did Cher. It's part of being in this business. Don't lump me in with other women like we're all the same, Jennifer responded, her tone now stripped of diplomacy. Don't act like you're doing me a favor by undermining my work on your show, and don't try to pass this off as truth when it's really about your need to diminish women who've succeeded. Kimmel's face reddened, and for the first time during the exchange, the smugness faded, replaced by visible irritation. I've had many accomplished women on this show and never had any issues. Maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe it's that you can't take a little feedback. The statement hung in the air, tense and unresolved, like a fuse waiting to ignite. Jennifer paused, then responded with a measured calm that cut even deeper. A little feedback, she repeated. You invite me here under the impression we'd have a standard interview, and instead you question my abilities, my relevance, my age and my career decisions. You label me desperate. You suggest I should step aside. You compare me to other women, as though we're interchangeable parts in your entertainment machine, and you're calling that a little feedback. I'm just doing my job, Kimmel said, his tone more defensive now, the earlier confidence waning. Sometimes that involves asking difficult questions. If that's a problem, maybe interviews aren't for you. The weight of his words seemed to land even with him, but by then the damage was already done. Jennifer's eyes widened slightly, clearly surprised by what she had just heard. If I can't handle it, she repeated, her voice low but steady, more powerful than if she had raised it. Jimmy, I've been handling people like you my entire life. Since I was a teenager starting in this industry, I've dealt with men who tried to undermine me, dismiss me, and show me disrespect. The only difference is most of them had the sense to do it behind my back, not directly on national television. She rose from her chair, the sound of it scraping against the floor breaking the silence in the room. The suddenness of the action caught the audience off guard. A few even let out audible gasps. Kimmel glanced up at her, and for the first time there was visible uncertainty in his expression. You know what the real issue is, Jimmy? Jennifer said, standing tall with the same confidence that's defined her decades-long career. The issue is that you're an insecure man who tries to make accomplished women feel small. You sit behind your desk, tell your jokes, and smile like it's all harmless, but underneath it, you're just another person who can't handle a woman who's done more in her career than you ever will. Kimmel opened his mouth, but no words followed. His earlier composure had faded. Just minutes ago, he had controlled the conversation. Now that control was gone. And what's worse, Jennifer continued, her voice growing firmer, is that you actually believe you're being smart or edgy. But what you're really doing is being disrespectful and narrow-minded. You think bringing me down makes good television, but all it's done is show your audience exactly who you are. The studio was still, with the only noise coming from the quiet buzz of the cameras. Jennifer turned her gaze to the audience, many of whom were watching in stunned silence, some with a look of quiet respect. Then she turned back to Kimmel, who now looked uncomfortable behind his desk. I've been in this business long enough to recognize when someone is trying to use my name for attention, she said, her words clear and direct. But what you don't seem to realize is that I didn't get where I am by letting people like you push me around. I got here by speaking up, by earning respect, and by never letting anyone make me feel like I was less than I am." She paused, letting the room absorb her words. When she continued, her voice remained calm, but carried unmistakable weight. "So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to walk off this stage with my head high and my integrity intact. And you're going to sit here and think carefully about the kind of host and the kind of person you really want to be. Because right now you're showing the world exactly the kind of attitude that women like me have had to push back against for far too long." Kimmel finally spoke, but his voice lacked its usual confidence, sounding more like a weak attempt to regain control of a conversation that had clearly gone off track. "Okay, let's just take it down a notch. This is still my show, and I think you're reading too much into what was meant to be a regular interview." Using the word overreacting was a clear misstep. Jennifer turned to him sharply, her reaction so immediate that a few audience members in the front row instinctively leaned back. Her eyes now held the weight of frustration that had been building throughout the exchange. When she replied, her voice was steady and deliberate, each word cutting through the silence. "Overreacting," she repeated, her tone emphasizing every syllable. "Jimmy, for the past 15 minutes you've been steadily undermining me, questioning my talent, my relevance, and my age on live television. And now you want to suggest I'm overreacting. You honestly think calling a woman desperate and implying she's irrelevant is standard interview material?" Kimmel shifted uncomfortably in his seat, finally starting to recognize that he may have gone too far. "I never called you washed up," he said quickly. "I was just raising questions that the audience might be thinking. That's part of what a host does." "No, Jimmy," Jennifer replied, her voice rising just enough to command full attention. "What hosts are supposed to do is treat their guests with courtesy. They're meant to create a space where people feel safe to share their stories and promote their work. What you've done here is use this platform to corner me and try to humiliate me for laughs." She stepped slightly closer to his desk, and Kimmel instinctively pushed his chair back a bit. The balance of control had clearly shifted. Just moments ago he was leading the conversation. Now he seemed to be retreating from it. "You want to talk about desperation, Jimmy?" she continued, her tone gaining momentum. "What's really desperate is a man your age using his platform to belittle successful women. What's desperate is hiding behind your writers, behind your desk, behind forced laughter, while you chip away at people who've built careers through decades of hard work." The studio fell into complete silence. Some audience members had already pulled out their phones to record the moment, sensing its significance. Others just sat frozen, watching a major public figure call out a host, directly and without hesitation. Kimmel, now visibly unsettled, made one last effort to steer the conversation back. "All right, maybe we've gotten off track. Why don't we just take a breath and talk about your latest projects? I think the audience would like to hear about what you're working on." Jennifer let out a short laugh, but it carried no warmth. "Now you want to talk about my work? Now you're interested in my projects after spending the last 15 minutes questioning whether I even belong here? You think you can just shift the conversation and ignore everything that's just been said?" "I'm trying to help us move past this," Kimmel said, his voice now carrying a trace of genuine unease. "We can still turn this around if we just shift the conversation." "A way out?" Jennifer replied, her voice rising with conviction, filling the entire studio. "Jimmy, there's no way out of this. You made your decision when you chose to disrespect me. You made your decision when you called me desperate. You made your decision when you implied I should step aside and quietly disappear, as if I no longer have value." She paused briefly, her gaze sweeping across the studio, from the cameras to the crew to the audience, all completely focused on her. When she continued, her voice was steady and firm, reflecting decades of resilience in an industry that doesn't easily offer respect. "But what you didn't expect, Jimmy, is that I wouldn't just sit here and let it slide. You didn't expect me to speak up and show everyone watching what happens when someone tries to tear down a woman who has spent her entire career refusing to be diminished." Kimmel appeared ready to respond, but Jennifer raised her hand, and the authority in the gesture stopped him mid-breath. "I'm not done," she said, her tone cutting through the silence. "The issue with men like you is that you believe you can say whatever you want to women, and we'll smile and tolerate it, just grateful to be on your show. You think you can question our talent, our age, our relevance, our very presence, and we'll just sit quietly and accept it." She shook her head slowly, the expression on her face almost sympathetic as she looked at him. "What you fail to understand is that women like me didn't make it this far by staying quiet or playing along. We got here by working harder than anyone else, by proving ourselves time and again, and by never letting anyone make us feel undeserving." The studio was completely still. Even the sound of Jennifer's heels as she stepped forward seemed amplified in the silence. "So here's what's going to happen," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "I'm going to walk off this stage, and everyone watching is going to see exactly the kind of man you are. They'll see that behind the humor, the charm and the carefully rehearsed lines, there's someone who uses his platform to undermine strong women." Kimmel made one final attempt to regain control. "Jennifer, come on, let's just finish the interview. We can cut anything that didn't work. It doesn't have to air this way." That suggestion seemed to strike a nerve. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice took on a tone of firm rejection. "Edit it out?" she repeated, clearly offended. "You think I want to erase what happened here? You think I'm ashamed of defending myself? No, Jimmy, this is exactly what I want people to witness. I want them to see what happens when someone tries to disrespect me. I want them to see that I don't back down from anyone, not even someone with their own show." She turned to face the audience, addressing them directly for the first time during the exchange. "This is what it looks like when a man tries to diminish a woman and fails. This is what it looks like when someone completely misjudges who they're dealing with." Then she turned back to Kimmel, her final words clear and controlled, the intensity in her voice unmistakable. "And since you seem to care so much about having an honest conversation, let me be honest with you. You're a poor excuse for a host, and an even worse example of a man. If you think I'm going to stay here and listen to one more insult, you've completely lost touch with reality." She paused, allowing the silence to emphasize her point, before delivering the closing line that would soon be replayed endlessly across media platforms. The words echoed through the quiet studio with undeniable finality. For a few seconds, no one moved, no one spoke. Silence filled the space. Then Jennifer Lopez turned and walked toward the exit, composed and confident, embodying the poise that had defined her long-standing career. Her heels tapped steadily against the stage as she crossed in front of a speechless audience, past surprised crew members and cameras still capturing every step of her exit. She didn't glance back. She didn't pause. She didn't spare Jimmy Kimmel, or anyone else in the room, another second of her attention. And as the studio doors closed behind her, leaving Kimmel alone at his desk, surrounded by an uncertain crew and a quiet audience, one thing was clear: Jennifer Lopez had just delivered a firm and unforgettable response, and it was a moment that would mark a turning point in talk show history. For Kimmel, recovering from it wouldn't come easily.